friends, enemies, and those who haven't decided which one you are. I greet you. Hello. From my studio, the sun has fallen and the stars have risen. It is now night where I am, and from the looks of my calendar, Halloween is fast approaching. One of the traditions I enjoy of Halloween is telling stories, and what better time to tell a story of a ghost-like origin than at night? I feel I should add to that tradition. But before I start the story proper, I feel I should give a prologue, if you will, about my meager story. Although it is not the story that I intend to tell you, I believe it will give you context, dear listener, to my story. I am from a city located in western part of New York State. Quite cold, quite frigid, and it inspired me to some degree to move and find my fortune not so much in New York State or in America, but in a land overseas, in the land of Japan. While working at many places in Japan, I have met other people who are bitten in their own fashion by the travel bug, and unlike I, who have stayed in Japan, continue to travel to find themselves. I'll hold that story for a moment because that point is very important. Now, the job that I am doing is teaching English. Not only just to children, but to adults of all ages. Now, if I was to give you a tip about teaching English to adults, I would tell you that it is important to keep the adult speaking. You see, they have already learned a bedrock of grammar for the most part, and they just need to practice and use it. A Halloween lesson that I enjoyed doing was around their belief on ghosts. I would start the lesson off with very simply asking them if the student, believed in ghosts or not. Regardless of the answer, I would follow up with why. Why did they believe? Why didn't they believe in ghosts? Those who said they did believe in ghosts did have some interesting stories, and maybe I will tell those stories at one point, but not today. The next part of this lesson, I would tell the students to tell me a ghost story. Now, for those who answered that they did not believe in ghosts, I would very simply say that in my home of Western New York, there are macabre things, such as skeletons, buried in the main roads. And when they try to renovate the roads, they discover these skeletons. Sad part of the history behind the skeletons is that they were once a certain group of people forced to leave my city by the main roads. And as they were leaving, some did not make the journey and were buried on the spot. For years later, to be dug up by construction crew trying to add more tar to the road. That is not a ghost story, but it is a rather macabre story, and I would ask them to try to think of a story likewise. This story falls in both categories, a ghost and a macabre non-ghost story. Going back to the subject of the people I have worked with, this particular story deals with a young man named Edward, and we will meet Edward in our next installment. Thank you. Now, before we continue, I hope you don't mind a little bit of house cleaning. I don't often ask for people to like or subscribe to these videos, but it was brought to my attention that there's a algorithm that assists with that, and maybe if you want to hear the rest of the story, you might want to click like or such. And I am on Patreon, I suppose. That is a worthy plug, but that should be for another day. Until next time, sweet dreams. Friends, enemies, and those of you who have yet decided which one you are, I greet you. Hello. The sun has gone down once again, and the stars have arisen. It is now night in my studio, and it is now time for me to continue my story. The last time I mentioned how I moved to Japan to make my fortune, as modest as it may seem. While living in Japan, one does meet Japanese people, but we also meet international people who are traveling to other countries, sometimes staying for a brief spell in Japan, sometimes moving quickly. Our story is about one who moved quickly, Edward. Edward was someone I worked with around 2004 for the same company. We were also housemates. We got along civilly enough. We enjoyed the same video games, some of the same movies, and we got along well. He and I were very different, though. He always was just a touch smarter than I was. A little more on the ball. And before I left that company, he had been promoted to be manager, which he did turn down, for he was interested in traveling. Unlike I, who seemed to be happy in Japan, he felt the need to continue his travels. We kept in contact to some degree, but ultimately we lost contact over the years, as one does. But I was quite surprised. Around 2016, nearly 12 years since the last time I worked with him, I received an invite for coffee at a nearby shopping mall cafe, of all places, to meet him. Why? I wasn't exactly sure. When I met him, I was reminded of how at one point we had a similar appearance, enough that some students of ours confused our names. But now, as the ages have turned against us, I a little more plump, and he a little more nervous looking. After procuring a table and a drink, we exchanged some minor greetings until he broke out with this startling reaction. It's not going to work. I'm sorry. This is not going to work. I gotta go. This is not going to be good for you. I stopped him. I wasn't exactly sure what he meant. What exactly wasn't going to work? maybe we could make whatever he needed to work. With my resources, his intelligence, we could get something done. At least, the story would be very interesting, or so I hoped. Well, it, I'll tell you. It started about 3 years ago. I was traveling around and I decided to rent a villa for a short time to relax in. I was working for a tourist company and I really didn't need to spend much time in the office. I could really just log into my computer every day and send a few emails, do a video conference, check a few schedules, and call the rest of the day off. That sounds like a dream-like job, isn't it? At least that's what I thought. So, this particular villa that I was staying was a very old villa. It had a history of, well, a very strange history, and it was located near a cliff. Well, here we go. A strange history. A cliff. The mystery deepens. Tell me more. Alright, well, the villa was once a small castle, and it was changed during the Reconstruction period after the last war, after World War II. It was bombed twice, at least the first time in World War One and then World War II, and it was bought by a person named Mary, who was an old spinster who kept the villa, to herself until she died, and then it went to the banks, and the banks were renting out to various tourists. But because of this cliff that was next to, not many people wanted to stay at the house. You see, this particular cliff had a very bad history. And a lot of places throughout the world have places like this. Um, lot of death, a lot of suicides. The people in the village not too far was giving it names like the Suicide Cliff, the Widower, the Single Mom Jumping Spot. You get the idea. There was a lot of reported suicides from this cliff. And it was a strange story. The woman, Mary, who used to live at this place, I don't remember her last name, but this Mary was uh, noted to be watching these people jump off without stopping them. And when someone asked, why didn't you stop these people from jumping over, she would always say something bizarre like, uh, it's feeding her. I now know what that means. But I didn't know what, and I don't think anyone knew what it meant. This old villa had difficulty getting people to stay there because, well, places like this, they're old, and the wind plays with acoustics, and usually people think that the weird sounds that they can attribute to ghost sounds, the scratching in the walls, that's either from rats or bugs in the walls, or even the wind in a cave or something like that. So when I was living in this villa, I did not think anything about the weird sounds, what sounded like laughter, the sounds of screaming, crying. I thought it was wind or something. The cliff was, well, the top part of the cliff was very steep, but the bottom was a very rocky coastline. And, even if you did jump, chances of you surviving was very rare. And this particular villa had a really neat garden. Oh, why is that neat? Are you interested in gardening? No, the garden had one time belonged to the castle that it was. Before the wars, it was a castle. I mentioned that, right? Yes. Now, this particular garden was walled off from the debris. You see, although they had repaired this villa from the remains of the castle, there was still a lot of debris. There was, from the wars, which is, quite a long time ago. The first war, at least, was about 100 years ago, and you could barely get to the garden. You could look at the garden, you can see through the garden, but you couldn't enter the garden, which was interesting because there was a lot of beautiful wild flowers growing into that garden. Now, everything about that place seemed nice, except I kept having this weird feeling that I was being watched everywhere. Every time I walked into the place, I felt eyes on me. Now, I don't believe in ghosts, but I still had this uneasy feeling that I was being watched, and now I know why. But I'll get to that later. And it was unsettling, along with the creepy sounds and all that. Although I knew where the sounds were, it just felt bad. I didn't want to have any guests come over to this place, but I still enjoyed working there, living there for a time, until we had this giant storm. And that changed everything. That's why I'm so nervous and messed up right now. Because of a storm? How bad of a storm could it be? Were you struck by lightning? No, it was a heavy rainstorm. Lightning, true, yes. And I was in my villa. I was listening to a podcast or something when a very nearby thunderbolt crashed down, shaking the place. Along with that came a very loud, blood-curdling scream almost outside. I rushed out to see what I thought someone was hit. I couldn't, I wanted to see what was going on. There wasn't much light. There was countryside. I had a little bit of a flashlight, kind of looking for, what made that sound in the rain. And then I hear this woman sobbing, saying something like, "Mary, I killed John. Mary, I might have killed John." And I'm trying to find who said that and say, "Listen, there isn't a Mary around here. Who are you talking to? Get out of the storm. It's not." I'm looking up. It's turning. The voice turns out to be coming from that garden that is unacceptable. You can't really get to, that is difficult to reach. But there was someone stuck in that garden. You mean this garden that was kind of blocked off from the world? Yes, there was someone there, and somehow someone got stuck in there. Maybe they keep talking about how they killed this John, calling for this person named Mary, and I could only think maybe this Mary was a person who originally owned this villa, but she had died quite a long time ago, during the 70s or 80s. And I try to reassure this person. I can't see this person. It's stormy as hell. And suddenly a lightning comes down so close to where this person is speaking. And for a split second I saw this person, and it just was, I don't know if I could even call it a person at that time. It was just, when you see an image and you're not exactly sure if what you saw was what you saw, so you want to see it again. So I kept on training my eyes to that one spot to see what I seen. It looked like a butchered, sewn together, naked woman, bloody and stitched, and it was really weird. There was one half of a second, that lightning burst. I looked around, and by the time another lightning lit the area up for a split second, my little flashlight had died, by the way. It was useless in that storm. By the time the light came up again, I could only see someone trying to get back into somewhere else. And I just told, I don't know if they were listening or not, I just said, I'll wait until the storm is over. I'll get you in the morning. I'll see if I could help you and John and Mary in the morning. Well, my friends, I think this is a good time for me to stop the story, for we will find out more of what he did in the morning of the storm. But before I end, a little bit of housekeeping. As a YouTube channel, I do not like asking for you to like and subscribe, but I have heard of an algorithm that helps people do that. If I, as a YouTuber, say, please like and subscribe. Along with that, I have a Patreon account if you feel the need to add any funds. It'd be much appreciated, and later I hope to add some art for this series accessible for Patreon. I'll have to figure that out. But until we meet next time, sweet dreams. Friends, enemies, and those of you who have yet to decide which one you are, I greet you. Hello. The sun has gone down, and the stars have gone up. It is once again night in my studio. It is time for me to continue the story at hand. Last time, I introduced to you Edward. Edward was a former coworker who I lost contact with, but after over a decade, called me up out of the blue and asked if I wanted coffee at a shopping mall cafe of all places. He had his reasons, I found out later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. He had told me a story of him visiting England. He had stayed in a villa that had at one point been a castle before the Great Wars had started. This castle had a sad history of suicide and deaths connected to a cliff nearby. He stayed in this former castle villa despite odd sounds which he believed were mice in the walls causing scratching sounds, wind in caverns causing moaning sounds and other such ghostly sounds. For he, at that point, did not believe in ghosts, despite the grim connection to this suicide cliff. As he was telling us, though, things took a change during an extremely strong thunderstorm where, with a bolt of lightning and a blood-curdling scream, he dashed out of his villa to a hidden garden that was once part of the castle but was inaccessible outside, and saw a woman who seemed to be, well, damaged, screaming and crying about possibly killing someone. Let's go back to that cafe, and let's go back to talking with Edward, my very nervous friend, shall we? So, Edward, you were telling me that you met a woman who seemed to be in distress. Can you tell me more about that? There's not much I could tell you. I only saw her for a brief second in that lightning burst. There was thunder and lightning, and then next thing I noticed that she looked like she was going away. it looked like she was like, I only saw her for a brief second. It was madness. Best way to say is like if you take multiple colors of skin, I guess, and even like green, blue, rotted skin, I suppose, and kind of imagine them being sewn together. That that was what it looked like. But again, that split second, I only saw so much image. My brain couldn't really process that image. It just it was, she was naked, but although she was naked, it looked like all of her naughty bits was like not there. It was just like I don't know what to say. I mean, don't want to sound pervy, but it was such a strange sight. But maybe the lightning was playing tricks on my eyes, but I clearly heard that she was calling to someone named Mary. The only person I know with that name in that area was someone who had owned this villa like decades ago. And she was saying that she might have killed John. This was a horrible storm, and I was hearing her clearly despite the rain. I tried to calm her down. I couldn't find where she was, and I told her to stay inside, and in the morning I'll go and try to get her out, help her or whatever. I get back into the villa, and I didn't want to wait until morning, but I did try calling the local authorities. Cliche of every horror story, why don't they call the cops? Well, I called the cops. Unfortunately, it was a small area that this villa was in, and the electrical lightning storm had caused problems, so the police were very busy, and they just said, "Listen, we'll get to you in the morning." And you know what? That worked perfectly for my time scale anyways, because I told her I'd try seeing her in the morning, and by that time, hopefully the storm would be gone, right? Yes, I completely understand. Continue. So morning comes, right? Cop comes, and I tell him the story, and he doesn't believe me. This whole area knows everyone that comes and goes. It's a small area, so everyone knows each other. And even though I had not really interacted with the locals, they knew who I was. And that's good. I don't mind. But I told him that I found someone maybe squatting in this garden. He couldn't believe me. And he didn't even know how to get into this garden. We both walked around a little bit, and he said, there's no way anyone could have been in this wild garden. It's been blocked off for a century, if not more. But you know what? I told him, listen, let's walk around one more time. Maybe we can find something. And walking around the second time, I found a rock that, due to the rain, it looked like it was on soft footing. So I kind of persuaded the cop to use some rope and tie it to his car, and we were able to move this boulder, this rock, away from the garden's entrance, and I was able to get into the garden. We walked around the garden a little bit, and it looked like he was kind of impatient. He wanted to get back to whatever he was doing before he checked up on this, and he was certain that I had heard nothing. The history and everything, storm, spooky, scary house. People's minds have interesting images. That was his idea. Fine, okay. I let him go home, wherever he was going. So I investigated the garden. I thought it was kind of interesting. This garden had not been walked in apparently for quite a long time, so I thought it'd be kind of cool to see what else was around. Maybe I might find some kind of ancient item. And what I did find, though, I found where the lightning had struck. Remember I mentioned I heard a very strong lightning, and it shook the villa a little bit, and I heard a scream, and that's what caused me to come out. I found what the lightning had hit. It had hit a metal door, and it kind of broke the metal door open. It was kind of hidden, but with a little bit of investigation, I was able to find it. Of course, when I was with the cop couldn't find it, and So I decided that I was going to investigate on my own. So I decided before I go out and everything that I was going to get a decent flashlight, And filter mask, I was kind of worried that there might be mold or something in this area, the cave and plant like that might be dangerous. So I brought one along just in case. I have filter masks just for a hobby I was trying to start, but never mind. As I was about to go through the door, I found a glass bottle kind of wedged by the door frame. I pulled it out, and there was a note in the glass bottle. I tried to read it, but it was kind of long, and I was more excited about exploring this door, the insides of the door. It looked like the door had been closed for quite a long time. So I decided to read the note later. I skimmed it a little bit, and it said, from Mary. And I'm like, okay, this is Mary, maybe the owner of this establishment, died probably in the 70s. So I go through the door, and the first thing I notice is, what looks like, a skeleton on the other side. And I looked around a little bit, and, this I wasn't going to call this cop back for a skeleton, not just yet. I mean, I'm kind of excited, but I'm just like, ooh, take a couple pictures of the skeleton of this crime scene before I continue on. The skeleton looked like it had been there for quite a long time, mind you. It probably been there for at least 30 or more years. I'm not an expert on that, but from movies, there was no flesh on this thing. So I looked around, and it seemed that there was a note, it was a picture of a man and a woman, and on the back was a note, and it said, that this person was John and Mary, and it said the date of 1941, which, I don't know. I mean, I thought this was damaged after the First War, but maybe they had found a way back into this, whatever. I was going to investigate even more later. So I kept on walking down this hallway. It was a legit hallway carved in stone. It wasn't a cave or anything like that. And this hallway kept going downwards. As I was walking, I noticed that there were candles. So cautiously I lit a candle, because if there was a gas leak or anything like that, there would have been an explosion. I didn't want to be burnt alive, basically. So I lit a candle, and I'm walking around, I'm exploring, and it looks like a whole underground castle, kind of. There were rooms that were very decorated, but they had also looked like they haven't been used in quite a long time. I found, for example, a library, a full-on scaled library, but each book had so much mildew and so much cobwebs on it that I couldn't read the books. I could read some of the titles, and they looked like they were medical titles from quite a long time ago. So I didn't even want to touch those books. I kept on walking, finding weird rooms that had old furniture, all of it kind of rotted, kind of moldy. I found at least one or two other what appeared to be corpses, skeletons, or things that remained of people. And one of them had a note in his pocket, and it was something that he had written before, I guess, he died, because it looked very dramatic. And it said something of the nature as, "I found that the ghost of this manor is real. I've seen what this ghoul does with the bodies." The ghoul ghost, and this body, this corpse looked like it was, quite old as well. The clothing and everything. When you imagine clothing from like 1600s, that's what it was dressed like. And of course, most of the clothing was half deteriorated from the mold and everything. But this was an interesting exploration. I'm glad I had my little filter at that time. As I was walking, I kept on going down. I just didn't have enough sense to go back up.
I should have at that point because I kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper, and I was finding myself getting more and more interested in what was going on. And then at one point I heard water, which kind of got me to, well, a little room that smelled horribly bad. This room smelled so bad, and using my flashlight, I discovered, well, bloodstains. Bloodstains upon bloodstains and bones upon bones. My guess is that anyone who used that cliff for the suicide, their body was probably pushed through caverns to this room. That was only a guess, because the stench of decay and death in that room was seeping into every particle there. I had to get out for a split second, and I was almost thinking about going back up and finally calling the authorities and explain I found interesting stuff. Maybe someone could legit come down with better lights. Now, I had a flashlight, but it was just a one-man team. And I was half thinking maybe I should go back up and call the authorities. Until then, I saw her, and that's and that's when I realized, well, I needed new pants basically, because even in the dim light, she came out and hold on, she, her. Are we playing the pronoun game now? No, she never really got a name. I think she was saying that someone had called her Galatea, but it was maybe this John she had mentioned before. Um, let's go with Galatea. Okay? Yes, sounds prominent. Galatea? You mean the same Galatea off of that myth of the statue coming to life and so on and so forth? Yeah, yeah. You can Google it if you want, but yes, there's more to that myth. But yeah, Galatea was a statue that came alive and fell in love with its maker. This Galatea did not fall in love with her maker. I'll go into that more. But when she came out, she was wearing a wooden mask that was painted white. And despite the very darkness of the hallway, my candle and my flashlight was able to just briefly add some light, and it was spooky as hell. She was wearing a wig that kind of looked like a hood made of hair, a black hair. It didn't really fit properly. It fit over her wooden mask. Her wooden mask was lacquered white. It was shiny. And these weird red lips that were also very shiny. Look, neutral kind of, but her eyes was just, God, I couldn't escape her eyes. Her eyes were just this murky yellow. I just kept staring, half out, half open, not fully staring at you, but at the same time staring at you. And she also appeared to be wearing a long sweater that had been very bloody, that covered from her whole body, from her knees up, long sleeves and everything, and a gray but bloody sweater. And I saw her, and she looked at me, and I realized that I was not looking at a statue or a painting or a person or a decayed body or anything I could fully understand. Although the mask did help, I guess the mask also added to the creep factor, and I realized that beyond that wooden mask and that wig, and then that bloody, battered sweater, that there was a person or a thing that was living. And for the first few minutes, she didn't say anything. Galatea just stared at me, and I tried to Oh, I lost what I.
Well then, it seems that our poor Edward had a fright that day, and I think at this point it is good for us to pause and continue this story another time. Well, friends, before I go, I hope you do not mind a little bit of upkeep for the house. As a YouTuber, unlike many, I do not often say please like or subscribe or share my videos. I believe the free will of doing so is for the viewer. But I recently was told that there is an algorithm that helps YouTube videos become more and more noticed if the YouTuber says that. So please click like, subscribe, share, or anything else you might feel that you need to click. And also, I may boldly and modestly tell you about my Patreon. Yes, friends, I do have a Patreon account, and as soon as I put these videos up, I plan to put artwork for this series that I have made for Patreon users. Just click on the link in the description below. Thank you for listening, and for now, sweet dreams. Friends, enemies, and those of you who have yet to decide which one you are, I greet you. Hello. The sun has gone down, and the stars have gone up. It is now night in my studio. It is once again time for me to continue my story. The last time I told you about Edward, a co-worker from back in my youth, who, after over a decade of silence, called me out of the blue for a cup of coffee at a cafe in a shopping mall. Curiously, I took the invitation, and he told me an interesting story that involved a villa in England that had one time been a castle. This villa was located by a macabre cliff where the locals rumored that people would go there for suicide. Not bothered by the odd history or strange sounds, for he believed the strange sounds were attributed to the age of the villa. He enjoyed staying there until a night of the storm where he saw a disfigured woman screaming about murder. The next day, when the storm had ended, he found a recently opened entrance that led him down a dark hallway. Using a candle and a flashlight, he found a few corpses, a library of mold and mildew, and other such rooms. One particular room he found distasteful was a room where the bodies from the suicide jumps seemed to have been washed upon, and the room smelled of death. While he was in that room, he noticed eyes looking at him. A woman who he is claiming to call Galatea was looking at him behind a wooden mask and a dirty sweater. Describing Galatea set him in a panic. I calmed him down. I got a sweet from the cafe and asked him to continue. I find sweets are better to ease people into stressful stories. As he started, he looked around nervously. I never knew that he was so nervous until now. Edward, Can you please continue your story? You were looking at this creature, she was looking at you, and then what did you do?
It wasn't so much me. I was still in a bit of a shock, and honestly, I literally did need to change pants now, okay? And which is odd because she picked up on that really quickly, and in a very dead like serious voice, she just blurts out,
You're not the first man to soil their pantaloons at the sight of me, nor will you be the last. Pantaloons. Ooh. How long has she been gone?
actually, hold on, okay, so that got me out, and yeah, that was an interesting way to get me. There was a good icebreaker, and then she continued in that same dead-like voice.
I know of you. I have heard of you. I have watched you above. I have some questions I want to ask you. Be quick. Give me the answers. But beware. I am not of the right mind. I have gone mad from time to time. I am now coherent, but I will go mad. It's only a question of time. Time. Time.
And that was the creepiest thing I had seen in my life. I backed up a little bit, but it looked like she took a moment for her to calm down. But while she was doing that, she was just moving like some sort of weird puppet, but just maddening. But okay, so when she calmed down, I took a breath and I tried to say a few things, just just to lighten the load, kind of, in the conversation wise. Just I basically asked her like how many people were down here. I was looking for someone who might have killed John, and uh, someone who was very disfigured. Was she that person that I saw during the storm? And then she said,
Clearly, yes. As you were entering these tunnels, did you not see a few skeletons? And did you not investigate the skeletons? If you did, you would have noticed I have a skeleton by the entrance that you walked through, and in a pocket it has a photograph of what the skeleton looked like in real life. That was the John I was mentioning. I am sorry. I do go mad from time to time. Time. I do go mad. And the storm last night put me in a tizzy, put me in a spell. And I. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get you down here. In fact, I think you should go back up. Close the door and lock it. I am alone here. But I do have some questions I need to know. And if you can endure my madness for just a little bit, I'd be a very appreciated person. Person. Honestly, when she was doing these weird voices, it freaked me out. But realistically, she was rather kind of small, and I probably could have defended myself against her. She was really going to attack me like a psycho or whatever. But at the same time, I was curious. So I said, okay, you have questions. Fine. Let me hear that. As long as you don't kill me, you stay over on your end, I'll stay over my end. Are you okay with that idea? And then she replied, Yes. Do not touch me, and I will not touch you. Do not touch me, and I will not touch you. My question is, on the picture that you found in John's pocket, it was written down 1941. At that time, there was a war going on, and I cannot leave this area. I can go into secret tunnels in the remains of the castle above, but I cannot see time. I cannot see the progress of days to night, years. And I would like to know is it still 1941? Are we still at war? I haven't heard the bombings in quite a long time. But sometimes I become very still, almost death-like still, and I wake and I have no idea how much time had passed. Is it still 1941? That question that she asked it blew my mind. She had been in here for over like 70 so years. How could she still be alive? What was she eating? Was she eating like the corpses of the suicide victims? I mean, like, how? Does that explain the creepy yellow eyes glowing out from the darkness? Was it some sort of nuclear fallout or some kind of radiation that no one knows about that was tested on England soil? I try to explain to her that, the present day, the year, etc., etc., uh, you know, and she was, well, kind of shocked. But then she continues asking shocking questions. And she just asks, like, about medical information. I'm not a doctor. She wanted to know if there was any progress in bringing the dead back to life. And I was trying to mean, like what? Like, flatlining for a few seconds and coming back. But she said, no, digging a corpse up and bringing that person back to life. Or creating a new creature? And I was very confused when she started talking about that. But then she stopped and she said something like, John and Mary, the last people that I have seen alive and talked to alive, told me that my story reminded them of a book by a young lady named Mary Shelley, a story they called Frankenstein. Mary was so kind and she gave me the book Frankenstein to read, and it was deeply unsettling to discover a story very similar to my own story. But unlike the creature in Frankenstein who was able to escape the laboratory, I could not escape. Could not escape, could not escape, could not escape. At this point I could see that she was about to go on and have another tizzy, fizzy, whatever. So I said, okay, tell me more about your story. Who created you? Do you know who created you? When you were created, if any time? I mean, you just said you don't know when time passes now, but was that 1941 or what? So she told me her story, and by gosh, that is one story that is sick. You know how they say that men only want one thing, and it's, well, sick? Apparently, this one guy created a female Frankensteinish monster, but not for science, but, well, for his own carnal pleasures, if that makes sense. I don't want to go into detail, but this was quite a long time ago. Apparently, she had kept his notes in actually pretty good condition, and it looked like it was dated to be like the 1600s. I mean, of all the things in that place, it was rotten, moldy, and etc. These science pages of how she was created was kept in very good condition. Mainly because for her, that was how she was able to keep alive. Actually, sometimes she would have to replace body parts. And since there were people who were literally just jumping off this cliff and the bodies of these people were coming to her area, she would learn how to, well, take what she needed from these corpses. That's why her body looked so disfigured and so disgusting. But at the same time, it seemed that she had killed the creator very early on. So early on that she really didn't catch his name. The weird thing is, because of this creator's weird psychological hold on her, she was afraid to leave the castle. She was a very big shut-in,
And there were a few events she mentioned that every time she would leave the castle, she would find the villagers with pitchforks and torches and all that fun stuff. Maybe it was in her mind or maybe not, but listening to this woman, and sometimes she would be calm and collect and dead quiet. Then she starts doing these like creepy, echoey voices, like it just. I didn't know it was. I was bewildered. I wanted to know more what was behind the mask. And I tried to ask if she would take her mask off so I can see her face, and she was very hesitant about that. And that's understandable. I'm not going to ask creepy woman in dark tunnel to, like, show me a creepier face, but I was just curious. The sad part of all of this is that because she was created in a weird way, her brain probably wasn't all wired up how it should have been. And that was one of the questions she was asking about medically. Was there any advancements in brain medicine? I don't know. But it was a very odd meeting. It was very civil as long as I kept her from talking from time and her identity as a person. So after some time, I left. She allowed me to leave, and she asked if I could bolt the metal door again. It was destroyed in a thunderstorm. And I don't know. I said I'd look into it. I left, and I thought, happily ever after, creepy woman left to her own devices, and I would be, okay. I have a story to tell, and that's about it. Maybe a few nightmares. As I left, now you might have remembered when I entered this place, I found a long letter, and this long letter was from Mary, who had originally owned this villa, and it was too long when I first found it. I didn't want to read all of it, so when I finally got above ground, Galatea didn't follow me at all. I got above ground, looked at this letter, and it surprised me. It was a warning. It talked about Galatea, told the person, whoever found this letter, not to continue down the hallways. That this Galatea was basically immortal, but it was also a type of person that would always change their minds. She couldn't really keep to an idea. Yes, she wanted to stay in the tunnels, but she also wanted to explore. And there were times that she would become homicidal and a maniac as well. And I discovered that quite early on. As I left the villa, I found, more and more of her just looking around the corners, and that's why I wanted to hopefully meet with you, because, we used to look the same. And I was hoping that if we were in a place like this, she might be seeing us now, and possibly. I was going to give you a jacket that I wore when I first met her, and pretend it was a gift, and hope that you would wear it and that she would mistake you for me. So she would kill me instead of kill you. Is that what you're trying to tell me? Yes, but I don't think it'll work. I mean, you gained some pounds there. You should lay off all those sweets. She can obviously tell that we are not the same person anymore. Maybe this was 20 years ago, yes, but not now. So that's my story. I don't know what to do next. I don't think I can go to the authorities, and I don't know if she's really there. I'm losing my mind. I see those yellow eyes just gleaming out, and sometimes I see that wooden mask, just in odd places that you don't expect to see, like going to a movie theater or a quiet cafe is almost impossible now. I have no idea what I can do. Do you have any ideas? Any advice? I can't be 100% sure, but I think that, there's a lot more disappearances around me these days of people who I barely know than my neighbors or convenience store clerks I see often. They disappear, and I think it's because that she's trying to get fresh body parts. As her body rots, she just needs to get newer parts. And I feel like I'm leading people to death. And I was hoping that if she thought she would finally kill me by killing you, no offense, that she would lay off me, and she would go back to England or whatever, and I could live a happy life doing what I was doing before, just carefree, traveling around, just being a free spirit. Do you have any possible ideas? I feel like I'm going crazy. Maybe crazier than she is right now.
I thought about this for a moment, and then I said to him that it might be a wise idea to surround himself with a community of doctors, while at the same time continue to travel, for maybe one of the two would pan out. He gave it a thought. He said okay, and then he walked away. And that, I thought, was the end of his story and his connection to me. But a few years later, he came up in a way that I did not expect. And that I'll save for the next time. Before I leave, I have a little house upkeep I want to do. I hope you do not find this annoying, but I, as a YouTuber, have always felt it was weird to say please click like, subscribe, share, any of those drawl buttons to click on. But someone had mentioned that there is an algorithm at stake now that would help YouTubers such as I am. And I also have a Patreon account which I hope to have some pictures of this series on if you feel the need to join. Until next time, where I conclude this story, sweet dreams, friends, enemies, and those of you who have yet to decide which one you are. I greet you. Hello. The sun has gone down, and the stars have gone up. It is now night in my studio, and it is time for me to finish my story. Edward and his discarded Galatea was something that I forgot. Sure, he had planned to have his discarded Galatea, this creature he found in England that seemed to be composed of Frankenstein-ish parts of corpses. He had planned to have her kill me instead of him, but as he said in the beginning, it was not going to work. I, in my part, forgave him and forgot about him. Time moved on. Then, time stopped. The pandemic of 2020 seemed to affect everyone in their own way. 2023, this year, things began to move again. And as I was waiting for a train, I happened to run into a strange-looking woman. She was quite pale, had a very deep scar across her face, dark circles around her eyes, and her eyes itself were yellow, very murky and creepy looking. The type of feeling that emanated from her was not of ease, and I tried to get away from her, and she seemed to follow me, even though I was at the train station. I thought maybe I should take a different train. She had yet to say anything, but something felt off about this person. Until she asked me if I knew where Edward was. At first, Edward did not come to mind, and I was very confused. Then she reminded me that a few years back I had met him in a cafe in a shopping mall where he told me his fantastic story of England and a villa. It slowly came back to me, and I realized that no, I have yet to talk to Edward, and I was half ashamed that I had not thought of him in such a long time, but then again, we were never that close. She looked at me and said that I had given him some very good advice that she also was able to use. Oh? I asked. What exactly was that advice? Completely forgetting what I had said to him before we parted ways, she said that I had advised him to make friends with the doctors and medical community and travel, which is something he did, and she happened to be a part of it somehow. Looking at her very carefully, I wasn't sure exactly what she meant. She said that due to his association to the medical field and her being around him, she was able to understand modern techniques in medicine and was able to improve her life and her mental state. But during the pandemic, she seemed to have lost contact with him. I did not know what to say. Was she the Galatea that he had mentioned? She did not look that disfigured. Although she was creepy, she did not look like she was in badly need of new skin. She had a weird smile, and I saw a train approach very quickly that I thought that I could use to escape. Seeing this train, I said, well, if I do see Edward, I'll let him know. And then with that, I jumped on the train, and there ends this story. I hope you've enjoyed the episodes, the chapters, and everything associated with this story. Now, as I end, I'd like to do a little house upkeep. As a YouTuber, I do not like asking people to like, subscribe, share, whatever they do these days, bells, beepers, whatever. But someone told me that there is an algorithm at stake, and it will help viewers see my material. Well, please do what you feel that is necessary. I also have a Patreon account which I'll set up so you can see art for this story which I did create. Until the next time, your eyes meet my content. Regardless of animation, story, or anything else. Good night. Sweet dreams.